People really loving the digging into Romans, and the crowd is thinning every Sunday, right? Every morning. It's all right. All right, let's see. We got are doing bowling today. Well, nothing. It's all right. Lori's dad passed. All right. Any additional requests for prayers that are not in the bulletin?
My brother-in-law is having open heart surgery in the morning.
Oh goodness. What's his name?
David Hardesty.
Is he here? No. Colorado? Where's he at? Your brother-in-law?
Oh, he lives in Beaver.
Okay.
He's Rob's stepbrother.
Got it. Okay. Anybody else? Any other thing? All right. Let's say a prayer and then we'll dig in. Dear God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the time that we have this morning to get together and open your word and to have a good discussion together about Romans and the message that Paul delivers and the application that we can take to our lives. We thank you for the ability that you've given us to make it here safely this morning. We've had some snow the last couple of weeks that has inhibited some folks to make it, but we pray that those roadblocks have been removed and cleared for everybody to make it here safely and to fellowship and worship together. Father, there's a few folks that we would like to pray for this morning. Kara just mentioned her brother-in-law David is having open heart surgery tomorrow. We ask that you'll be with him and the family and the doctors that are going to be operating, that they'll be prepared and strengthened, and that we ask that you'll give everyone that is a part of that procedure and that is going to be impacted by that to have a positive mindset and to be an encouragement to each other. A few others that we'd like to pray for. Fred Thomas has COVID, and Lori lost her father recently, and those are certainly trying times, and we ask again that you'll be with those around them to support them, to care for them, to just again to be a light to them that may not be able to see the light that potentially is challenging at these tribulations and these difficult times that folks are going through. We thank you again for this time that we have to gather and to dive into your word. We thank you for Jesus, for his death on the cross that allows us to be here this morning and to give us the hope to be with you in heaven one day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so it dawned on me that I don't know how many weeks we have this quarter. I think it's actually 12. If we don't get a rolling, we'll make it through like 3 chapters of Romans. So I have a real bad tendency to talk. But I thought last week was really good discussion. So thank you for continuing to share your thoughts. Please do not at all hesitate, because to me that's what helps me the most, is hearing other perspectives and insights around what we're reading. Romans is a difficult book. It is a challenging book. It's a challenging book to study. It's a challenging book to sort of not necessarily apply, but especially if you're studying with a non-Christian, it can be pretty, say blunt, if that's the right way to say it, like it can be pretty direct. But I think the context that Paul's writing under is helpful to be able to deliver that message in a powerful way. So we kind of ended where I wanted to spend the most time last week, which was the theme of Romans. So let's open Romans chapter 1, and if I can ask somebody to read Romans 1, verses 16 and 17. And again, this is the theme of Romans. This kind of sums it up in these 2 verses. So if anybody has those 2 verses, please read it out loud if you could. Read it together. I love it. In unison. Let's go. Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. So in an earlier letter that Paul had wrote, to letter to the Corinthians, he was writing about Christ being crucified, right? That's a big part of the Corinthian letter. How would you think the Greeks, the Gentiles, the non-Jews, felt about that message? What's your opinion?
If we're talking like death, burial, resurrection, they wouldn't even.
Yeah. So one of the commentators I was reading said that many Greek would consider it foolish, folly, silly, right? How about the Jews? How do you think the Jews would take that message? How would they feel about it?
Just even from the scripture, it says hangs on a tree first. If their Messiah would possibly die on a cross.
Right. So there's a reference that I have. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 21 through 25. I'll read it. So it says, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." So Jews were constantly seeking these signs to them, right? And to your point, Molly, it kind of conflicted with what they had maybe taught growing up or what they believed, right? So they were in search of these signs, and that was certainly a stumbling block, as Paul writes in the book of 1 Corinthians. So remember, Paul, right? He'd been mocked, he'd been ridiculed, he'd been kicked out of synagogues. He had been on trial in front of philosophers, giving a defense for a lot of these things that he was supporting in a prior life, but now he's opposing. What's Paul's message here? He'll constantly refer to his message as my gospel. What is, in your opinion, Paul's gospel? If you think about that theme in Romans that we just read, what would you consider Paul's gospel to be? There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just asking for perspective. What is Paul's gospel?
Corinthians 15, death, burial, resurrection.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it, in my opinion, right? So I think Paul looks at it in I don't even know the right way to articulate it, but almost like a living, breathing thing, if that makes sense, right? So he's not just talking about history, what had been done in the past, right? The early Christian sermons, right? Or the early acts of the first church, right? He's not just talking about what God did back in the day, once upon a time, many, many years ago, right? He's preaching that the death, burial, and resurrection, right, the work on the cross, happened, but it continues to speak, if I can say it like that, and sort of reconcile. So there, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, there is, I'm pretty sure that's where it's at, if my memory serves me correctly. There is this whole idea of reconciliation with God, like coming into the same mindset of that. You know, I had to actually look up. I know what reconcile means, but I wanted to put myself in Paul's shoes and like, what is he trying to say when he says reconciliation? But it's. I think Paul's gospel is he's trying to communicate that the work of God continues to happen every single day. It's not something that happened once. It did happen once, but it's something that we have to live and breathe. The power of God is at work in the world every single day. Right? We have something that we look to historically. And because it's at work every single day, I believe that Paul's saying that that's the power that the gospel brings. It has the power to move, to create a response, right? To create action. It's not where you stand socially. It's not any organization you're affiliated with. It's not like skills that you might have naturally. And Paul had a lot of those things naturally. He grew up in Tarsus. We talked about him being a Jew, so he was highly educated. He was a part of those groups that were highly thought of, maybe one could say. But I think Paul's gospel, as I've studied just a little bit, right? By no means am I an expert here. It's the offer of that salvation. And I think the book of Romans, and Paul's gospel specifically, and we'll dig into it here in just a little bit, is he constantly is like shining this light on how everybody needs, right? We hear constantly Greek and Jew, it's for all, right? All have sinned. And how that offering of salvation is so attractive, maybe. Almost like he's advertising and marketing that message of salvation. Not necessarily because he's trying to sell something, but because he knows how valuable it is. Again, at this stage in Paul's life, he's been through a lot. And he realizes that at this point, the only truth that matters is the truth of what Christ did on the cross for us, and how that is the power to move us to respond in a way and live in a way that is acceptable according to what God called us to live, how God called us to live. I think he's at this stage in life, again, where he just doesn't care what others think. He knows what the truth is at this point, and he is not afraid. He is not afraid to proclaim it. Thoughts? Questions? I probably won't be able to answer them, but what do you think? Would you agree with how I view Paul's gospel to be? It's very interesting looking out and seeing looks on faces. I always wonder what's going through minds when I see these looks sometimes. What do you think? Come on, Keith. You want to say something? Come on.
It's in any way opposition of how I view it, and certainly reconciliation. That can't happen without what done for us, Christ. Christ was the revelation of God, flesh on earth, and none of that matters if we don't make it relevant to each and every day of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It happened 2,000 years ago, not brought to light that affects my today. What good was it? That's all.
And the audience in which he's speaking to is, you think about the Jewish audience. They're so bent on and focused in on all the stuff that had happened in the past, right? All the studies, all the what is supposed to happen, the law. And he's going to hit on that in just a second. So in verse 18, going through, we're going to try to get through the end of chapter 2, but even through almost the end of chapter 3, he's going to segment and talk specifically to Gentiles or Greeks, and then he's going to talk specifically to Jews as to why they need this, why this gospel, and why it's so important to listen to what I'm telling to you, right? So let's start chapter 1, and we're going to go verses 18. Let's see. We're going to go verses 18 through, let's just go to 32. I know it's a chunk to read, but maybe we can break it up. We'll go 18 to maybe 24, and then 25 to 32, if anybody would like to read either one of those sections.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, suppress the truth and righteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident. Since the creation of the world, visible action, eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. Futile in their speculations, their heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Exchanged the glory of corruptible God for an image, form of corruptible man, of birds, four-footed animals, crawling creatures.
Therefore,
Go.
Therefore God also gave them up to lust of their hearts, to their bodies among them. Changed the truth of God for the lie, worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions. Even their women exchanged the natural use that is against them. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, that is shameful, themselves the penalty of their error, which they do. And inasmuch as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, those things which are being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of things, disobedient to parents, unlearning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them.
A lot there. If you need to take another 2 or 3 minutes to read it like I usually do, do it. But for those of you who don't, who are quick to understand after reading it once, immediate reaction to what Paul says there in that passage. What do you think? It really does, right? I mean, when you first read it, and you know, it almost seems, man, Paul really has a really pessimistic view of humanity, right? Like, ooh. It does sound a little bit like today, right? What else? Anything else come to mind as you look through that passage?
I think he's trying to make it clear that what he's about to present, we need.
100%.
We're in bad situation otherwise.
You know, we have, it's a really good point. We have the benefit of knowing what Paul writes later on in the book of Romans, right? And kind of using some the whole word to sort of cross-reference and support certain things. He really does seem to have a really, really, some would say pessimistic, maybe realistic view of the world, of just mankind, right? Jew and Gentile, like, even though they see themselves completely different, really not that different. They both need salvation. And you know, the more times I read this part, it seems as if the darker the life that seems to be portrayed that is without God, the brighter the light of offering of salvation is, if that makes sense. And I think that's what Paul is trying to do here. Because what's he tell us ultimately in Romans 3? It's a really famous verse. All have what? All have sinned and fallen short. Jew, Gentile, doesn't matter. How you got there may be a little bit different, but it doesn't matter, right? And that's important for us to not forget that. So in verse 18, who's he talking to here, in your opinion, specifically? Jew or Gentile? Gentile, right? Why do we know it? Why do you say that, Molly? That helps, right? That certainly helps. So it says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, who by their wickedness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. think through that, and the word that keeps coming to my mind as I read through that is just like the providence of God, right? Like, so the way I think about providence of God is God at work through natural means, if I can say it like that. And I believe the reason he's talking to Gentiles, beyond what we know the headline to be, right, is because everybody can see the same thing, right? Jew, Gentile, Corinthian, Ephesian, it doesn't matter. They can all see the creation, right? The things around us, the beauty that is this world. And he says it's what? He says it's plain. My Bible says plain to them. What is any other translations there in verse 19? For what can be known about God is evident, right? It's easy to see. It's not mistakable. Mistakenable. So what's his point here? Why is he pointing that out to us, specifically to the Gentiles? Yeah. You don't have to know the law, right? You don't have. He'll get to the Jews in just a second, right? Just because you don't know the law or don't have an education in the law or whatever the case may be, doesn't give you an excuse to not know God. It's evident. It's right in front of you. It's right in front of you, right? He goes on to say, he talks about making images. Perhaps a rhetorical question, but I do not mean it to be rhetorical. What's he talking about? What do you think he's talking about when he says in verse 22, claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man or birds or animals or reptiles? Yeah, right, idols. But a really interesting topic, though, because why would they create idols or images of, what does it say? Why would they do that? Why would they create an idol to show respect, to worship it?
It's shown we want to worship
Yeah.
mankind once.
Uh-huh. Agree. It's almost like they recognize that there is some kind of being. Hence is why they create this idol and some kind of higher power. But what does he say? They exchange the glory of the immortal God for these like substitute images. But Paul's argument is they can see God, right? So I think you're on the right. I agree with you. It's hard. It's easy for us to say it's evident to them, right? But so why does Paul say they're without excuse then? I hear you. I don't know the answer necessarily. Because think about it. I mean, think about the world today, right? If part of our calling is to what? Is to go out and preach the gospel to all. For those that have unable to become ever in contact or have no means to, like, how would they have known? How can I say that that's inexcusable for them? I don't know.
Certain things that Craig dealt with many people job over the years where they may have claimed ignorance to the law. Oh, I didn't know that's how it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not an excuse. You should have known for whatever reason. And even though hard for us on this side looking from our perspective, there is enough evidence, whatever, that should have known. Don't have an excuse. I'm not.
Yeah, it's a great question. So in reading some of these, go ahead.
Especially then, Jesus was there.
True.
A lot of these people saw the guy.
True, very true. Especially folks like the Jews had certainly heard about him, right?
Yeah. 1,000 years later, you could say you.
I can make an
don't,
argument.
but you could say.
Yeah.
also
Hmm.
because
Yeah. And look, I don't think Paul's saying this. I don't know if maybe he is. It kind of reads that way sometimes. You kind of, as you read this, I almost feel like Paul, not necessarily yelling, but he's getting a little bit of a raised tone. He's getting very passionate. I don't know. But remember what he's doing here. He's not necessarily saying, shame on you. To a degree, maybe he is, right? But he's setting the stage for what did we just say? He's setting the stage to say that no one is better than anybody else, and we all need the salvation of God. Whether you didn't know the law and you should have seen the natural providence happening and it should have just organically happened, or you had the ability to study the law as a Jew, right? You should have. It doesn't matter how you got there or what your excuse is or isn't. We all need it. Remember, that's sort of what he's trying to set the stage to communicate in verse 3. The commentator that I've been sort of using as sort of my general one that I picked up in Royce's library, among some others, here's what he says, just for context here. He says, his point is one which would be readily granted by the popular religion of the first century Hellenistic world. I think that means Jewish world, Hellenistic. Pretty sure that's what that means. Which had largely been influenced by Stoic philosophy. So, kind of like the philosophy, the world that Paul grew up in, right? That Tarsus world where it was a lot of professors and a lot of education. That kind of world, if I can say it like that. Man can discern the presence of a divine power at work in the world, creating order and harmony. The prevalence of idols was an obvious testimony to the awareness of a deity. However, the effect of the knowledge which Paul grants is not salvation, but responsibility. An interesting take on it, more than anything else. All right. So he's talking to the Gentiles there. And then he talks to the Jews in. Let's jump to chapter 2. And there's some interesting parts in the end of chapter 1 where he's talking about God giving them up. I don't want to discredit that or jump right over that because it is an interesting conversation. Maybe we can hit it for a couple of minutes because I do want to talk about his direct communication to the Jews, right? So if we jump to verse 21. Right, it says, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, or birds, or reptiles, or animals. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their heart to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men, and receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see it fit to acknowledge God, gave them up to a base mind and to improper conduct." God gave them up. What do you think? Say that again, Rich. Okay. What do you? Yeah. What do you think? Let's build on that. Like,
I've been chewing on that for a while now. Our society, obviously, preaching a different message about this. Songs that are on the radio, or maybe I was made this way. I struggle with that because God made it very clear that that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not the way it was designed to be. So I struggle believing that God can create anybody that they were predisposed to dishonor him. But at the same token, I still haven't figured out what does this mean when it says game over.
Yeah.
That's what, I mean, it's almost like throughout history, either wipes people out or he gives them what they want, one or the other. And
then they probably realize that, that's probably not what I needed,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah. It's a tough one. What else? What do you think? Additional thoughts there? I'm not waiting for you to say what I think. Look, this is a difficult one. Romans is full of these ones where, you pull certain things out of context, or out of like the bigger message. There's people that can pick apart and really go head to head with why this isn't for them.
I mean, I guess in the end for me, even if that phrase there opens the door for possibility, some people born predisposed in one direction, that still doesn't allow for, I think of the movie The Beautiful Mind.
Mm-hmm.
Where they talked in the end about having a diet of the mind. You're still ultimately in control. That person that is an alcoholic, maybe they're in a position where they are now predisposed to using alcohol. That doesn't mean that they have to give into that. They can choose to be a sober life. So even if a person is predisposed to sexual orientation, because God gave them over, all right, if that's what you want, then that's what I'm going to do. That doesn't mean you have to partake. That doesn't mean
True.
you have to indulge.
And remember who he's still talking to here. Who's he still talking to? Gentiles. He'll tell the Jews, hey, you may not have necessarily partaken in some of these things, but you kind of approved of them by your lack of action. He tells, and he says basically the same thing. He says, you're just as guilty. You're just as guilty. If you read the 28, let's read 28 through the rest of the chapter very quickly. I don't want to discount that because I think they are connected to a degree. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a base mind and to improper conduct. They were filled with all manner of wickedness. Here comes one of those lists, right? One of those lists of a lot of bad words, right? Like, oh man, wickedness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malignity. Is that how you say that? Malignity. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. That's a long list. Though they know God's decree that those who do such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but approve of them who practice them. Verse 1 of the next chapter says, therefore you have no excuse, O man, whoever you are, when you judge one another. For in passing judgment upon him, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same thing. Remember, again, and go back to what he's kind of teeing up. He's teeing up his very famous verse in chapter 3. All have what? Sin. What is sin at its core? What is it? Separation from God, right? How else would you classify sin? What kind of act would you think it would be? Almost, probably 100% of the time. It's considered to be, in my opinion, it's selfish, right? In some way, shape, or form, sin is it's a conscious selfish act or a subconscious selfish act, right? And there could be more to this. But the way I just think about what he's writing here is the things that you're doing are all selfish. That list that he just dumped on him at the end, they all come back to doing things more for yourself than for God, which does isolate them, which does separate them and us, right? As we sin, it does the same thing. As it separates us from that salvation that we have, right? That offering that we have. It's a pretty direct comment that he's making here. It is interesting he's calling out specifically the homosexual acts, right? I don't really know the real reason for that, to be honest with you. I mean, I think it's been happening for a long time. Not a new thing, unfortunately. Go ahead, Craig.
I don't know if this will in a way that makes sense. My boss is very good at yes sayings. Out there, he's gathered for years, and a lot of them make a lot of sense against walls. One of them is what we permit, promote. Starts with permitting something. Start with permitting something. For long, someone else saw that it was permitted, so it must be okay. For long after that, that's the way it's always been done, so it's correct. It wasn't correct, it just permitted anyway. And it's led to something that's totally accepted, and you think it's right, it's not right, but never right, it's permitted. I think that's the same way with this.
I agree,
I didn't give them over like, you got to do this. Given the opportunity, committed by the people that should not right, off. It's accepted, like it's always been right this way, or that way.
Yeah, it's a great observation. And we've got examples in the Old Testament about. I keep going back to Pharaoh, how he chants after chants after chants after chants, right? And every time Pharaoh made that decision, what does it say? What happened to his heart? Hardened his heart, right? And at some point, what does it tell us about his heart? Kind of like God gave them up, right? Like, well, he knows eventually they'll figure it out, right?
And that's another thing. I mean, he hardened his heart, but that could have been his advisors telling him, and he listened to them instead of.
But he made the choice to do that.
Right, he made the choice. It wasn't that God stuck his finger
Correct.
in his head and said, heart's hard.
That's right.
It wasn't like that. It could have been his advisors.
Bad influences around him, absolutely, yeah. Ultimately, we make the choice. We make the choice. All that list, sensual acts that Paul describes, our choice. And he says right before that, you got no excuse. You got no excuse.
Satan's such a crafty fellow.
Super crafty.
And
Yeah.
he fools all these people who have these thoughts and doubts and allow them to come together and feed off of each other. And permitting things, voting is
Mm-hmm.
that's their thing. That we let them figure it out. When they're figured out by gathering together and,
Doing what we've always
never
done.
thought that we would be in the yard
Yeah.
today of it just being in your face constantly because all these people, it's okay.
Yeah.
And the people thought it's okay, grown so much, and that people are becoming, would have ever thought years ago. So in our faces as acceptable.
Hard.
Sickening.
Yeah. It's hard. And this, and of course, I said we were going to try to get to chapter 2, and it's not going to happen. But the message is very similar in chapter 2. He's just speaking to the Jews. Same idea. He's talking, hey, you've got no excuse either. You know the law, right? Your reasoning as to why you have no excuse is a little bit different than the Gentiles, but you don't have any excuse either. And he's talking about that. He calls them, if I can say it like this, shame on you, self-righteous. Woe is you. So he calls them out in all of chapter 2, and it extends into chapter 3 a little bit. But if if I can say it like this. You ever heard that saying, you know, get worse to get better? Whatever it sounds, you got to go through the bad times to get to the good times, or whatever that saying is, something like that. It's got to get worse before it gets better. I almost feel like this is kind of how Romans is right now. He's giving us the mess right now. Like look, y'all need this. Jew, Gentile alike, we all need salvation. And again, he's setting the context for what the guts of his letter will eventually be, right? The theme in this letter, again, is don't be ashamed. I am not ashamed. Let me tell you why I'm not ashamed. And you shouldn't be ashamed either. It doesn't matter what you've done. Look what I've done. It doesn't matter what you've done or what you do today, because that salvation, that offering is there for you. It doesn't matter what you've done, why you've done it, as long as you act in a way that is, you change your ways in a way that is in here as opposed to on the outer side, right? I think that's what he's setting up, is that message of that hope, that message of salvation. Now, it takes a little bit of time. You know, sometimes you got to get worse before it gets better, but you got to go right at it. You got to go right to the core. And he's going right to the core right now, to all parties. You got some issues, Gentiles. You got some issues, Jews. You're not special. But here's what you need. Here's why you need it. Right? So, good conversation today. Again, I failed to get through where I intended to go, but hey, we got some time to get there. But thanks for the discussion. Always thankful and appreciative of it.